In January 1938, a room of capable engineers closed a file on a Japanese Navy specification and called it impossible. They worked for Nakajima, one of the strongest aircraft firms in Japan. They weren't wrong. The numbers on those pages didn't reconcile. In Nagoya, at Mitsubishi's works, a 34-year-old designer looked at the same pages and started calculating. He found a way through. It cost him something specific. No armor plate for the pilot, no self-sealing fuel tanks. Nothing between a man and a bullet but aluminium skin and speed. The fighter he drew ruled the Pacific for roughly the first year of the war. Nothing the Allies had could turn with it, climb with it, or reach as far. The company that walked away would end up building more of them than Mitsubishi ever did. Everything that made it dominant in 1941 was something he had chosen to remove. On the 5th of October 1937, the Imperial Japanese Navy issued a document titled Planning Requirements for the Prototype 12 Carrier-Based Fighter. It went to two companies, Mitsubishi and Nakajima. The revised requirements that followed asked for 500 kilometers an hour at 4,000 meters, a climb to 3,000 meters in 9.5 minutes, 6 to 8 hours of endurance with drop tanks, two 20mm cannon, two 7.7mm machine guns, a complete radio set, and a direction finder for long-range navigation, maneuverability at least equal to the A5M already in service, and a wingspan under 12 meters because anything wider wouldn't fit a carrier lift. Any two of those were achievable. All of them together weren't. Nakajima's engineers read the sheets, read them again, and withdrew from the competition in January 1938. Horikoshi's memoir records what his own team said among themselves, that the Navy was asking for something that did not exist. Walking away from a specification is a judgment, and it protects you. Accept an impossible one, fail, and every contract after that becomes a question your competitors get to ask. Mitsubishi now had no rival left to lose to. That was the problem. Nagoya was where Japanese fighter design lived. The A5M, Horikoshi's own design and the Navy's front-line fighter, was in service and already showing its ceiling over China, where Japan had been at war since 1937. The Navy's difficulty wasn't finding a better dogfighter. It was reach. Its bombers were flying to targets no carrier could safely approach, and no escort in the world could stay with them the whole way. Somewhere in the Navy's Aviation Bureau, an officer had put his name and his career behind those endurance figures. In Nagoya, a design office had inherited them. 6 to 8 hours. That was the number that broke the arithmetic, and the number nobody was willing to cut. The Navy had asked two companies. Now it would get one answer or none. Jiro Horikoshi was born on the 22nd of June 1903 near Fukuoka in Gunma Prefecture. He graduated from the newly established aviation laboratory in the engineering department at the University of Tokyo and went to work for Mitsubishi at Nagoya. His first major design was a failure. The 1MF-10 never got past the prototype stage. It flew, it disappointed, and it ended. That matters more than the successes. By 1937, Horikoshi was not an untested prodigy. He was a man who had already been wrong in public, in front of the Navy, with his name on the drawings. What came out of that failure was the A5M, the first modern Japanese monoplane fighter in mass production by 1936, and good enough that the Navy came back to him. So the man who received the impossible specification had two qualifications. He knew how to build a light fighter that worked, and he had already survived being the engineer who didn't. Picture the drafting table late at night in Nagoya. The same weight calculation run again in pencil for the 20th time, looking for grams, not for elegance, for grams. He'd already learned what an aircraft costs when you get it wrong. He was about to learn what one costs when you get it right. The way through the specification was subtraction, and Horikoshi pursued it further than anyone else was willing to. The airframe used a new alloy, extra super duralumin, developed by Sumitomo in 1936, stronger and lighter than anything else on the market and prone to corrosion, which meant every part had to be coated after fabrication. Structure was drilled out wherever it could be. The wing was large and lightly loaded, which bought turn performance and a very low stalling speed. The span was held just under 12 meters to the centimeter for the carrier lifts. Then came the two decisions that defined this aircraft: no armor plate for the pilot, the engine, or any critical point, and no self-sealing fuel tanks, at a moment when self-sealing tanks were becoming standard on everyone else's fighters. If you're finding this worth your time, like the video and subscribe. What comes next isn't the version of this story that usually gets told, because the private record left by the man who made this trade-off says something very different from what his machine's reputation says. Understand why he did it, because this is not carelessness. Japan's engine industry could not give him power. The first prototypes flew behind a Mitsubishi A6M, producing 780 horsepower, at a time when the fighters he'd eventually meet were being designed around double that. With that little power, weight was the only currency Horikoshi had. Every gram removed bought range, or climb, or turn. He wasn't simply cutting weight, he was borrowing against a short war. Translate the choice into what it meant to the man in the seat. Armor is the assumption that you will be hit and need to come home. A self-sealing tank is the assumption that the fight will last longer than your luck. Take both away, and you've redefined survival. The pilot stays alive by being faster, by turning tighter, by not being hit at all. When he is hit in the tanks, there is nothing between the fuel and the fire. On paper, it was a weight problem. Underneath, it was a bet on how long the war would last. The first prototype was finished in March 1939 at Nagoya. There was no airfield at the works, so the most advanced fighter in Asia was taken apart, loaded onto ox-drawn carts, and hauled roughly 36 kilometers of road to the airfield at Kagamegahara. It took a day. Mitsubishi never fixed that dependency for the rest of the war. On the 1st of April 1939, Chief Test Pilot Katsuzo Shima ran taxi tests, made a short hop to check the controls, and at 5:30 in the afternoon took it up. It worked. The brakes were poor and there was vibration, later cured with a 3-bladed propeller. Top speed came in slightly under what the Navy had demanded, so the Navy ordered the third airframe fitted with a different engine, the 940 horsepower Nakajima Sakai 12. Mitsubishi had its own engine of that class and was reluctant to fit a competitor's product. They fitted it anyway. The Navy accepted the fighter in September 1939. The engine that finally made it work belonged to the company that had said it couldn't be done. Before the victories, one fact has to sit alongside them. Writing in his diary during the final year of the war, published in 1956, Horikoshi recorded that he and his colleagues woke on the morning of the 8th of December 1941 and found themselves at war with no foreknowledge of it. He wrote that most of those who genuinely understood American industrial strength never believed Japan could win. He blamed the military hierarchy and the politicians for driving the country toward destruction. That is the private record. This is the public one. On the 13th of September 1940, 13 A6M2s under Lieutenant Saburo Shindo escorted bombers over Chongqing and claimed all 27 of the Chinese fighters that rose to meet them. The claim is disputed. Chinese accounts record Major Louis Yim Kun landing an I-15 with 48 bullet holes in it, and at most 4 Zeros damaged. But the direction of the result isn't in doubt. And by the attack on Pearl Harbor, there were 521 Zeros in the Pacific, 328 in frontline units. Its range did something stranger than win fights. Appearing over battlefronts hundreds of kilometers from where it should have been, it convinced Allied commanders that Japan had several times as many fighters as it actually possessed. Here is what's usually got wrong. The intelligence wasn't missing. Reports, drawings, and reasonable performance figures reached Washington through attachés in China, through captured Japanese airmen interrogated by the Chinese, and through Claire Chennault's analyses. Officers read accurate descriptions of the aircraft and filed them as exaggeration because the aircraft described could not, in their understanding, have been built by Japan. The evidence had already arrived. Nobody could make themselves believe it. The turn came in 4 stages, and none of them required the Zero to get worse. The first stage was tactical. Allied pilots stopped trying to turn with it. They dived, fired in a single high-speed pass, and climbed away. Lieutenant Commander John Thach formalized the answer as a weave flown by two aircraft 200 feet apart, turning toward each other so that a Zero committing to one pilot's tail flew into the guns of the other. It was first used to effect at Midway in June 1942. The second stage was intelligence, and it was luck. On the 4th of June 1942, during the raid on Dutch Harbor, Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga's A6M was hit in the oil line. He put it down on Akuten Island, wheels lowered, on ground that looked solid and wasn't. The fighter flipped. Koga was killed instantly. His wingmen had standing orders to destroy any Zero that came down in Allied territory, and couldn't fire, because they didn't know whether he was alive. It lay in the bog for a month. On the 10th of July, a Navy patrol crew spotted it. By the 20th of September, it had been shipped to San Diego, repaired, painted in American markings, and Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders flew it, 24 flights in 25 days. The report was specific. The controls went heavy above roughly 200 knots. It rolled better to the left than the right. The engine cut under negative acceleration. Horikoshi's trade-off was now written down in English in a manual for every American squadron in the Pacific. The third stage was industrial. The Grumman Hellcat first flew on the 26th of June 1942 and reached combat in late August 1943, built on the opposite philosophy: armor around the cockpit and oil system, weight accepted, damage absorbed. 12,275 of them were produced. The fourth stage was attrition. Coral Sea, Midway, the Eastern Solomons, Santa Cruz. Engagements that cost Japan, the experienced carrier aircrew, it could not replace at the rate they were dying, and the airframe that had been shaved to the bone couldn't be up-engined and up-armored, because adding weight took away the only thing it had. The debt came due all at once. It wasn't the best fighter of the war. By 1944, it wasn't even the best fighter over its own territory. Nothing about the aircraft had changed. Everything around it had. Horikoshi kept working. He designed the J-2M Raiden. He spent the last years of the war on the A7M Reppu, the successor that arrived too late and in too few numbers to matter, delayed by exactly the engine problems that had shaped the Zero in the first place. In December 1944, an earthquake stopped production at Nagoya, and a week later, B-29s hit the Mitsubishi engine works. Horikoshi, exhausted, fell ill with pleurisy on Christmas Day and stayed in bed into April. Recovering, he took a train through Nagoya and recorded what he saw. The city burnt out. His factory, a steel skeleton. He wrote that he had little desire to go back to work. By early August, the remaining workforce had stopped even pretending. The surrender came on the 15th. Then the numbers settled the argument that opened this story. Mitsubishi built 3,879 Zeros. Nakajima, the company that read the specification in 1938 and called it impossible, built 6,538 of them and supplied the engine. The firm that refused the risk built most of the aircraft. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries did not survive the peace intact. Under the dissolution of the Zaibatsu, it was broken up in 1950 into West, Central, and East Japan Heavy Industries, and not reassembled until 1964. Meanwhile, the works at Nagoya went on making things. From 1946, a scooter called the Silver Pigeon. From 1947, a three-wheeled cargo truck. The same buildings, the same tooling discipline, the same people. An engineering culture looking for something to do with a skill it couldn't unlearn. Horikoshi found his own answer. He worked with Hidemasa Kimura on the YS-11, Japan's post-war civil airliner, then left Mitsubishi to teach at the University of Tokyo, the National Defense Academy, and Nihon University. He received the Order of the Rising Sun in 1973. He died in Tokyo on the 11th of January 1982, aged 78. His memoir on the Zero had been published in Japan in 1970 and appeared in English the year before his death. The machines outlived everyone. Koga's Zero, the one that gave the Americans the answer, was destroyed in a runway accident in February 1945 and survives only as fragments in American collections. One Zero hangs in the National Air and Space Museum, one at Chino in California, is the only flyable example still turning an original sake, and one sits in Nagoya, restored and displayed by Mitsubishi itself in a museum belonging to a company that now builds turbines, ships, and rockets. That same company spent roughly yen 1 trillion trying to build Japan's first homegrown passenger jet in almost 60 years and canceled it in February 2023. The government has since begun aiming at a next-generation aircraft program around 2035, so the argument has not closed. It has only changed clothes. In 1937, a Japanese engineer met an impossible specification by deciding precisely what to leave out, and the men who flew the result paid the difference. Nearly 90 years later, the same industry is still arguing about what a national aircraft is worth and what can be sacrificed to build one. If you have a view on that trade-off, whether stripping the armor was the right call for the war Japan expected or the wrong call for the war it got, leave it in the comments. Like the video, subscribe, and tell me which side of that drafting table you'd have been sitting on. In January 1938, a room of capable engineers closed a file on a Japanese Navy specification and called it impossible. One man didn't. The aircraft sits behind glass now, disarmed, in the company that built it, and the argument over what it cost has never been closed.